Thank you, thank you. You guys, you're not alone, right? Like, for so long, I think we've all thought we're doing this by ourselves. Who else is in this crazy new role? What does it even mean? And now we're here together, and in San Diego, so that's not so bad. I'm going to talk to you guys from a bit of a different perspective. I think you're going to hear similar kind of threads and themes from what Andrew shared and Marcus shared, but I'm coming to this as a practitioner and also as a creative leader who kind of stumbled upon creative operations and what this whole role and responsibility is about. I have a disclaimer also. I'm actually no longer at S&P Global as of about a month and a half ago, and now I'm at IBM. So similar to Marcus, this is my viewpoint, but happy to go into kind of specifics that I may not be able to capture on stage with any of you all after the presentation. So when I took a step back and thought about what I had been through in creating a team, operationalizing something that I had in my head that was creative and manifesting that and bringing value to the business, what I recognized is that the team I was creating had to be baked in. It had to be what I call essential, right? And it's easier said than done, like many things are. But the reality is there are great things that can happen in building a new capability like a creative team. That's kind of the prize part of it, right? But there's a lot of other stuff you got to get through to get there. And those are the pitfalls. So that's why I say in spite of it all, the reality is if you're in this room and you're in the midst of creating a team, it's a lot of hard work. And there are times when it's unclear what the reward will be. So let me get started because I want to give you all a bit of background about my story and how I arrived here. And 2016 was really a pivotal year for S&P Global. As a matter of fact, earlier in that year, S&P Global did not exist. We came to a new brand based on understanding that what we were doing in the past as a company wasn't working, right? Before April of 2016, we were McGraw-Hill Companies in general. Specifically, the division that I was in was McGraw-Hill Financial. And this was a brand association that was really confusing for a lot of folks. Folks thought we were still in education. They thought we still published, textbooks. However, the financial part of our name was meant to allude to our larger portfolio of companies, most well-known as Standard & Poor's, and most people associate S&P 500 with our brand. And that was really kind of our world, the financial intelligence world. However, our brand name was not communicating that. And the leadership understood that, the street understood that, and it was clear the company needed to really pivot and understand what value we were going to provide to our client base. What did that look like, right? So we made a pivot. April 28th, I will never forget that day because I got to stand up on the New York Stock Exchange. But also because, it was really a mark. It was a stand to say, what, we're embracing a future where we focus on financial intelligence and we focus on data around the capital markets. And that was a stance that was boldly proclaimed that day. It was also an opportunity. It was an opportunity for me to recognize that we needed a team to actually build that brand, to creatively express that brand. And I took that opportunity on probably a bit naively, right, but very excitedly, and realized that I needed to put together a plan of attack to go from what was in here to what could be manifested out there. And so I want to talk to you all a bit about the prior state. Look, this is only a summation of what I entered. I think there's a lot more I can say about this, but when I reached the point of evaluating the team that I inherited, I recognized there were a couple of things that were going to need to change. The team at that time was a very distributed team in terms of where they sat in the business, in terms of geographies, what they did, their roles. we were disconnected. There really was not a creative community that connected across the organization. Transactional in nature, I know, Andrew mentioned the idea of service and embracing service, but we were so transactional that it was really more of a ticketing culture, right? And if we're going to be able to talk about our brands in an elevated way, we had to deeply understand our brand, not just take in requests, but be leading that charge. We also were serving a diminished role, meaning that we typically took the back seat to marketing or to brand and weren't leading conversations from a creative standpoint. And that really started to create a form of complacency. And when that starts to get deep in your culture, it can stagnate. And what I started to see was that we actually were more of a service center, right, as opposed to a value add. Does this sound familiar to anyone in the room? Just show of hands. Yeah, I know. So what I wanted to do was move to this new state, a state where we were centralized, and not necessarily geography-wise, because I still had footprints in London, in New York, in Asia Pac. However, it was important that we were represented as one unified group. Integrated, right? So one person in Asia Pac might be doing one type of work, but did they recognize their value across the various other types of work and the entire company itself? Strategic. So again, being in the room, leading the conversations from a creative standpoint, having a valued role, being considered partners as opposed to just people taking requests, and therefore being progressive, right? Moving things forward in the organization to create a strategic capability for the company. And so in order to kind of step into this kind of new way of viewing the team, I really truly believe that I had to create a vision for where we were going, how people should start to perceive of us and think about us, and then also have an approach to doing so. The very first element that I created for the team was a vision statement. And typically I would have done this together, kind of in a collaborative fashion. However, I needed to get ahead of the potential naysayers and be clear about why it was that we were creating a center of excellence. This was the term that we were using for the new team we were creating. And the vision is aspirational. We were not anywhere near this vision yet, right? To be a creative catalyst that breathes inspiration and innovation into everything we create and epitomizes the essence of our brand. We weren't there yet, but I knew we could get there. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we did that. But then the approach. So you have this great vision. It sounds really neat. It has a nice tone to it. But how do you do that? And the way to do that was to really understand, well, where were we? And then understand where we wanted to be. And that's really what the vision is meant to do. It's meant to be that guiding point, that North Star to say, no matter what distractions come into our way, because there will always be distractions, we know where we're ultimately going. And so now how do we do that? There were times, though, when trying to get everybody to just be in sync with that was difficult. So there were times when I'd be that person all the way to the right, just kind of like, come on, let's all get in it and get exhausted and kind of trade places, right, and be the woman on the other side. But I also show this to illustrate that it was a team effort. I am representing the change here that happened over the course of a year and a half. However, there were a number of other folks involved, and so I don't want to mislead what I'm sharing with you to make it seem as though I was the person that created every single thing that I'm sharing with you today. But I did have to lead it, I did have to inspire it, I had to keep it on track, and I had to protect my team. So the approach that I took is something that came out of some research I had done a year and a half prior to that. And the idea, really the crux of the idea of my research had to do with the creative work that we do every single day, whether it's tangible or intangible, is about some type of output. It's about the product. We're here to create some type of work. And so this obsession on product is what was really the catalyst for understanding, well, what are the all things that we need to support creativity? What do we need to create product? And the very first thing, of course, is people. We know that. We've heard a number of people say that already, right? We need people to ultimately get work out there, but we also have to support the people. And the way we support the people is understand, well, what processes are best for them to create on behalf of the product, and then what tools will enable them. So that's the platform, right? The people, however, to be very clear, they inform the process. right? So your process is only good as your people and the discipline they have behind that. And then the platforms are meant to be those tools, those enablers. Ultimately, when all three of these elements are coordinated and working in lockstep, that then leads to performance, right? Driven people can create amazing performance. And ultimately, my point of view is that's culture. You're all working together towards creating an amazing product enabled by powerful tools with the best people. So I want to talk a bit about product. And when I talk about product, I'm specifically referencing the work itself. What is the work that we're doing? And why are we doing this work to begin with? So the first activity that was done in figuring out how to create this brand new team was to understand what was the work. And once we got really clear on what the work was, we audited the work, understood who was coming to us for requests, the type of work, we're able to really lay that out and then ask, well, why are we creating the work? So I want to show you a quick snapshot of the kind of work that we discovered. And this was across 5 different business units in the company, 20,000 plus employees. And you'll see just kind of the collection of stats, right? Sometimes we had a timeline of an hour. I know we can all relate to that, versus 90 days. Or sometimes something that came in that, oh, we need this in a week, all of a sudden, you really didn't need it in a week. You probably needed it in maybe 2 weeks, right? But the point was is that we're able to now collect this data and understand that we had various ways in which work was coming to us and various types of work that we had to understand, well, how do we work through this? How do we prioritize this? What type of team do we need to actually support this? And actually, are we doing the right work? And what we discovered, and ultimately what became the solution, was that all work is definitely not created equal, nor is it always lasting work. So the very first thing that had to happen was after you saw all the auditing that we did, we had to categorize the work and then actually prioritize the work. And we sat with our business partners to understand what truly was a priority, what was coming in the pipe, what were the strategic objectives for that year, and then walk through our plans in terms of the work prioritization with them and understand what we were actually going to do in the new year and what we weren't. This did not always stick. Be very honest, there were times when we would have an agreement in the beginning and things would change, but such is the nature of business. But I think what was the most powerful outcome of this activity was to tier our work. So different work requires different types of resourcing, requires different types of talent and timelines. And so we tiered our work across 3 different tiers. We had a tier 1, strategic, conceptual, high level, usually would land in the C-suite. A tier 2, which really was usually kind of pickup work that is still strategic in nature, but usually didn't have the same level of impact and visibility. And then we had a tier 3, and that was really more production work, the kind of hyper-transactional work. And then the goal was to also plan for future work, recognizing that we still had BAU, but we wanted to evolve that further. So that's the product, right? Focusing on what we're doing, the work itself. I want to talk a bit about the people, and that's really where I think I spent the majority of my time in figuring out what does this team look like, what should it feel like. And 3 of the factors we focused on, and I'm sure you all have seen these kind of 3 A's before, is the aptitude, the attitude, and your ability. I focused a lot, though, on aptitude. And that primarily is because when you're coming into the door for these types of roles and what have you, ability is fairly table stakes. And I want to make sure that there's some form of natural ability in you to do the type of work that's going to be requested of you. But secondly, what was really important is attitude. That you're coming into a team that's going to change a lot, that sometimes there will be ambiguity, and do you have the ability to roll with that and still contribute in a way that's meaningful? However, for the purpose of the conference, I did want to share just kind of a quick chart of how we started to assess our talent from a specific ability point of view. And we basically kind of graded folks. And the way I was able to make some of this data actually come out, because it's not something that a person in your team is going to readily share, was that I brought in a consultant. And that consultant served as a bit of the barrier between me and my team so that I could get information that was a little less biased, but also understand deeply, what kind of talent I had, which is a lot harder when you are in a supervisor position. Not all of that's going to be revealed to you. I think, I want to spend a little bit of time here too, because while it's important to understand your team, the people that you're going to be hiring, you're not in a vacuum, as we know, right? And so your true existence and viability also depends on how well are you partnering with all of the people in your organization. And so you're going to have people who are naysayers. That is just how things are. But understand, why are they naysayers? Maybe there's a really valid point. Maybe what you're doing has not been clearly communicated to them, right? So it was really important for me to set up some formal and informal ways to connect with my business partners, whether it was actually doing like one-on-one meetings, or whether it was like, let's go out for an informal coffee, talk about how things are going, talk about what you're hearing. Do you have concerns? We got to a point where it started to get very clear that the team that I inherited wasn't exactly the right team for building a future state. And so what that really meant for me, and particularly the team members that I brought on board to help build this new team, was that it was definitely time for a rebuild. And I think, as we all know in this room, when you're building anything, there are a lot of eyes on you, but you can't disrupt what exists already. So we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to rebuild this entirely new team, but also maintain business as usual, right? And so for me, what that looked like was the following. I knew that we couldn't disrupt what was happening in the team in terms of work product. So you'll see to the right and the left, I created these kind of two pillars, two function areas. Project management, we didn't have a standard in terms of the way we handle projects, and we really didn't have well-defined project management roles. So project management had to happen and be created so that we could get work in and still get it out, not be disruptive. To the very right, we recognized we had a lot of tier 3 work, we had a lot of production work, but I knew it was important to still build a strategic value add with our creative team. So we created a production studio that handles all of that churn in and out. However, we wanted to complement that with something that was going to be more strategic, conceptual, and that's what the two pillars in the middle represent. Creative leadership as a function, and then also operations. Operations was really about growing the team. Yes, it's the how, but how do we grow the team? And you'll see here, and it's a little bit hard to see the red against the black, but you'll see here a fairly flat team structure, and then the main functional roles, lead project manager representing the project management team, and then on the right side, a studio manager. Creative leadership was absolutely key. We didn't have people speaking on behalf of creative. Folks weren't used to us being in the room pitching, explaining why it was that we made the choices we did in our work. So bringing in an ACD and a CD was very critical. And then also, like some of the folks in the room, we did not have a way to really unpack our process and communicate our process. And so you'll just see just a bit more about how the rest of the team was set up with really supporting roles that are also in project management as well as the creative team. And this was a lean team. This team was about 20 or so people, right? Process, how do we do this? Right? How do we create all this work that we're now going to be responsible for and still, like I said, maintain business as usual? And so from the very beginning, I worked very closely with our consultant to just observe, see what people were doing, right? See what people were saying about us when we were not in the room, and that's why she was great to have, because she could be that kind of mole for me. But then I also actually interviewed our business partners and asked them, well, what do they think about our team? As candidly as they could, right? But you also already have a sense of that. People talk about the teams and what's happening anyway, so that's gonna be information you're gonna find out whether you kind of conduct some type of formal exercise or not. And what was revealed was not surprising. We didn't have a true process that was standardized. Didn't exist. A lot of what we were doing was based on legacy, and we are very responsive, hyperly so. And so what I knew had to happen was we had to create a clear way of showing to our business partners, well, actually, how do we do the work? So that they were on board, they understood the different steps in the process, And when they came to the table to work with us, it wasn't unfamiliar. And so what we created was a 5D process. And I'm gonna whiz over these quickly because I have a couple more things that I wanna be able to share. But the first was discover. This is kind of project intake when the work comes in. Define the work. Let's make sure we're aligned and then create a scope of work. Developing the work, that's the part we typically love, right? That's the real creative part. We're reviewing work, we're revising the work, delivering, getting that work done and out the door, and then debriefing, making sure that, all right, well, it's done, it's so-called complete, but is it really? How well did we do? What were the measures? Would you work with us again, right? And this is what I call the 5 Ds to our process. It's not perfect, and it's also not perfectly linear, but it was helpful to have at least a framework. So when our business partners came to us as we were changing the way that the organization did business, they had a point of reference. And then lastly, the platforms. I think platforms really are meant to be, and I think someone already spoke about this too, the enablers, right? And again, to figure that out, we had to understand, well, what were our needs? How are we going to prioritize those needs? And then actually do some research to figure out what tools made sense for us. We had a heck of a lot of tools. I think probably everyone in this room can relate to having too many tools. And there's some things you can't get rid of because it's enterprise, but there are other choices that you can make. So our focus was really on the project management part of things. What would be the right PM tool for us to use? And this meant that we were going to develop a kind of what I'm calling a tech stack that focused on project management, but then had supporting elements to that mapped to our actual process. And so what you'll see here at the top faintly is the 5 Ds. And then what you'll recognize below is that we then decided, okay, well, project management was at the forefront. Project management happens across every single D. What kind of tool did we need to be able to support that? First, it was Workfront. And for a variety of reasons, mainly because it had the proofing tool, we can customize forms for the entire 5D process, and it was scalable. For communications, we were using Microsoft because really it was enterprise-wide, but we also communicate through Workfront. Cloud-based Creative Cloud was kind of the standard, so we kept that intact. And then lastly, asset management, we're using Box, and that was, again, an enterprise tool. But we reduced our technology stack in half. So in a nutshell, right, touched a bit on all of the elements to creating kind of this high-performing culture when it comes to creating creative teams. But I do want to quickly recap, because I went through a lot, and I want to make sure, that a couple things stick. When it comes to your people, understand who you have in your team. You're usually going to inherit a team. That's just the nature of how things are. You're usually going to inherit a team. Understand your people, but understand that you're also working in a larger context. Who are the business partners you're working with, right? The process. Understanding that process every single step of the way, and then really charting it, diagramming it out so you can develop an optimal workflow. And in terms of the actual platform, this has to do with that tech stack. What is that ecosystem that we're working with, and making sure that it matches whatever that process is. For me, it was the 5 Ds, but also recognizing that it should be empowering. It should not be something that becomes a hindrance. Based off of a vision. The vision is the foundation. If you're in this room and you're a leader and you're leading a team, it has to be very clear to them where they're going, and the vision is what keeps everyone on track. And then being super clear about what is that work product. At the end of kind of the whole journey, what I recognize the most that I could have done better is really being very, very clear on why, understanding the whys of each and every part of this. And I think my advice for anyone in the room who's on this journey is to understand and unpack, yeah, okay, maybe the company has mandated you to create this, but is it really, really clear why you're doing it? And are you assessing it every step in the way? Because a month later, there could be a different priority. I want to leave you with just a quick summation of moving forward and also sustaining what you're doing, because it's great to talk about the framework, but then it's like, okay, well, I got to keep this up, right? I got to optimize. Things change all the time. And so as I say, hey, change can start with just one, but it takes community for that change to have a lasting impact. So number one, you're going to be very clear that you are cultivating that community that's supporting your efforts. Ultimately, you have to also work with that community to understand, well, what does success look like in the future? 6 months from now, a year from now. Get formal commitment. I cannot stress this enough. Make sure that you have people in your org that are buying in, but also that'll have your back and sponsor you. And showcasing your work. We do a great job of doing the work, we don't always show it off, right? We gotta make sure we get out in front and showcase the work. And remember that it's not all about quants, like, okay, well, we did these numbers of projects. Qualitatively, what's the experience? How do people feel? Seeking opportunities to be essential. For me, this is about finding hallmark projects. What are things that we can do that typically would have been farmed out to an agency? Let us take it in or work very closely with the agency to get it done. And then lastly, stay alert. A lot of stuff happens when you're building teams and you're so focused on building the team that you may not recognize that other things are happening in the organization. All of a sudden, headcount is frozen. All of a sudden, budget changes, right? So making sure that you're still involved in the business aspects of it all. Thank you.